Hello, everyone. Welcome to Scrum Pulse. Really happy today to talk about not only what the evidence-based management framework is, but also how a company, Net Health, that I've been working closely with, has been using it and how they use that to guide their agile transformation. So we have Nic Easton, who is a Nexus Scrum Master at Net Health here today to share that story. And I'll give a little bit of background on EBM framework, and then we'll talk about the implementation. So just a quick note recap for guidelines. Your microphones are going to be muted throughout. We do invite you to ask questions. I'm certainly going to be asking Nic a lot of questions during the session. And feel free also to include your comments in the webinar box. So just another quick recap. Who's Scrum.org? Well, Scrum.org is the home of Scrum. We're the professional Scrum certifying body. We have training, education, and assessments. We actually are located in Burlington, Massachusetts, our headquarters, which is where I'm sitting from today. What else does Scrum.org do? Well, we provide our professional Scrum courseware. You can see that here. We have an array of courses, and what we do is we actually have a group of professional Scrum trainers who teach this courseware around the world. And obviously, you don't have to just attend the training to get try to attempt to access your knowledge. We do have certifications that you can use to do that separately. Now, that's about Scrum.org. More on to today. My name is Patricia Kong. I am the one on the right side of this picture. And I've been at Scrum.org for over 6 years, 6 or 7 years. Background in organizational behavior and finance research, a bunch of different stuff. But what I do at Scrum.org is I'm the product owner of our enterprise solution. So that means I'm thinking a lot about that goodness that Scrum and Agility brings to a single team. How does that work at the rest of the organization? What does that mean around leadership, right? So how can we all take a leadership stance to bring more agility into the organization? And today I'm going to be moderating this ScrumCon and also kind of an interview fashion of Nic Easton. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Nic, and just give a quick introduction.
Thank you, Patricia. Like Patricia said, my name is Nic Easton. I come from a development background as a software engineer, but I've transitioned into a Scrum Master Agile coach role. And I believe that I found my true passion and calling in that. I've worked with individual Scrum teams, but for the last couple of years, I've been the Scrum Master of the Nexus integration team in our scaled environment. I wanted to talk a little bit about Net Health. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, Net Health is the leader in software solutions for specialized outpatient care. We're known for being the experts in the art of the right fit. That's our slogan, that's our motto, which means it's our fully interoperable EHR solutions that serve 5 specialty markets and offer clients an end-to-end solution that includes things like practice management, clinical workflow documentation, revenue cycle management, coaching, and analytics. We serve healthcare professionals in 98% of the largest hospital chains, as well as private practices around the country, driving workflow in more than 3,000 facilities each day. I've known Patricia for a couple of years now. We've done a webinar before on self-organization, and she helped me previously implement Nexus at Net Health, and more recently been working with us to implement evidence-based management.
Yeah, so, oops. I'm going to kick that over to myself, Nic. Sorry.
Sounds good.
From you. So
Please
yeah,
do.
Nic and I have been collaborating for a couple of years, and also with others at Net Health. And they've been on an interesting journey, like Nic mentioned. But essentially, when they were using Scrum and they found that, wow, we have multiple teams working together, and then they formed Nexus, they came into this conversation of, what are we looking at? How do we figure out, if this is actually bringing value to us, right? So if we think about the purpose of Scrum and is really to help us with creating more business value, how do we know that's actually working? Which is the question that I posed them, right? So they were moving from this notion of a traditional organization where, success to them was on time, on budget, on scope. right? That's the normal way that traditional organizations operate. And looking at on track means that they're hitting all those different milestones. And they have the similar problem as a lot of other organizations that we talk to is they're trying to change into a more agile organization. But what they were doing was focusing really on the activity and output, right? So how do they get into that mindset, and how do they know what to measure from an agile point of view? And the agile point of view is really, hey, we're looking at success wins, we're thinking about value or maximizing that, and we're looking at how we can be more sustainable through our qualities and capabilities, and changing to this notion of outcomes and not activity and output. So what does that mean? And when we start to talk about that and explore what value meant for them, and just I probably flipped up the same slide and just talked about, this new way of working or this other way of working or the agile way of working. It really caught on. And so we said, well, how do you measure this? What do you think about? And this is where we came into the framework of evidence-based management. So evidence-based management essentially is a way to say, hey, let's approach this from an evidence-based standpoint and look at 4 areas, key value areas, that organizations could be thinking about to help them increase their business value and agility, right? And the way that it helps increase that is saying, when you're measuring in these different areas and looking holistically at how it affects, other things, how fast can you run an experiment after you've measured that and see what the result is and learn from that? So we have 4 key value areas. Current value, upper right-hand corner, is where are you now? Then we have unrealized value, which is what is your potential value? How do we close the feedback loop to see if things are worth it? And when we look at that, right, so we're looking out at the market, we need to be able to relate that back to the organization. So that's why we have the other 2 key value areas of ability to innovate and time to market. What's interesting is that some of you might know that we recently did an update to the EBM guide. Previously, we actually didn't have unrealized value in there, but my colleague Kurt Binder was taking a look at this while we were doing a revamp, and he said, you know what, it makes sense to look at potential value, because a lot of companies don't sustain themselves by ignoring what the market's doing. And then also, we used to have metrics in there that were prescribed. So I think about 11 metrics, which we now suggest in an appendix, but we focus very much more on what is value for potentially an organization. So that's what we're going to get into now. I am going to kick it back to Nic as we start to explore the implementation at NetHealth. There you go.
Great, thank you. So I would say about 2 years ago, I started to look at the EBM framework, and I'd heard a lot about it. And I guess what I had started to realize was that, like Patricia said, we didn't really have great evidence to understand or even show if or how we were improving. And it was one of my personal biggest challenges, but I think what it turned into was one of NetHealth's greatest opportunities. We've always really wanted to increase the value that we're creating, but as an organization, even a product development organization, it had always been really tough to kind of nail down what value meant in a measurable way. And I guess we always said that we can't improve something that we can't measure. And we had implemented Scrum a couple of years ago, several years ago actually, and we were really uncertain about the progress that we had been making since adopting Scrum. I guess the last or second reason really why we implemented EBM was I think there was generally a different understandings across the organization about what it meant to be agile, right? There's not just events and metrics and things like that. It's, we're looking at what is our organization's ability to respond to many things. And so that's where we went next is let's define value at NetHealth. So I think we, of course, struggled with this at first, and Patricia, if you know her, challenged us to really dig in here. And where we started was with the art of the right fit, and that's our slogan. Like I said before, that's our motto, and that means that NetHealth is committed to strengthening patient care, outcomes, and facility performance. So what does strengthen facility performance mean? That means that our customers, we're talking about clinicians, physicians, administrators, are happy using our software, and ideally makes their lives and their jobs easier. The next thing that we looked at was strengthening patient care and outcomes. So just patients are healing more quickly. Ideally, the people that are using our software are using it the minimum amount of time possible to do their documentation, to do their reporting, whatever it is, so that they can spend the most amount of time with their patients. The last piece that we defined as value at NetHealth was that we work with happy employees that love building our software and build it very, very well. And so after we defined it, great. We had a starting spot. Now let's look at different ways that we can measure that.
I want to thanks Nick for saying that I'm challenging also. But I want to stress a couple points and just kind of reiterate what I heard back to the audience, because I think it's important. Where when we started this, I said, okay, what's your mission, right? So, and they said, well, we're the art of the right fit. What do you consider to be value? And a lot of organizations, they'll go, you know what? Well, we just want profit, increase profit, minimize costs. And I said, well, what do you really want? How do you think about, your customers? And what I love here is that this is really something that's very pertinent to NetHealth. You're focusing on strengthening facility performance. So you're focusing on helping your doctors and physicians use your software easier. So there's ease of use so that they can help their customers, their patients. And that's really important stuff that affects all of us. And also that focus on your number one asset, which is your employees. So it's really great to see that you guys have done some thinking about this and then driving a lot of focus around the things that you're doing and the things that you're pursuing back to this kind of value. Oops.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, we looked at now, okay, we have something defined. Now let's look at measuring it. And I guess what I wanted to start with here was that, since we've adopted Scrum, transparency has become more and more important and crucial to our lives. So what we talked about first was, whatever we visualize, let's make sure that anyone in the entire company can view it and can also leave feedback, so we can have some dialogue there. And so we built a dashboard, to visualize all of our metrics using Confluence, which is kind of like a shared space software. And then we use Tableau, which is just a way to kind of visualize data. And so what we did was we wanted to start small. We wanted to say, okay, we know we want to get this moving and we want to get going quickly. So let's start small and just see what we can do today. And we went to the appendix, or I don't remember if the appendix existed at that time, but we started at the top and through all of the key value measures, and we went line by line. And we looked at, okay, do we understand what this means? If we do, great. How or can we measure this today? If we can, great. How? Let's start doing it. If not, is this something that we can gather later, maybe, or what will it take to kind of gather this data that we think is important? And that was really interesting because it started some conversations about maybe some data that we didn't collect that we should start collecting, or maybe the inverse, right? Of here's some data that may not be important, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But ultimately, we opted to not include everything that was kind of talked about in the guide, and our application is a web-based application, so we don't necessarily have a installed version index. So we opted not to include that.
So just for the audience, we have the KVA, which are those 4 key value areas that I described. And within those, you can have your KVMs, which are the key value measures. And I said that there used to be 11 that we prescribed. We pushed those into the appendix. Nick, what about the value statements that you created before? Were you guys measuring both? Did you just start with this? Are you measuring those things that mean value to you guys specifically?
I think so. We used to measure some metrics, and I guess that's where I want to go next. Is we used to measure some things, and ideally we realized that this wasn't that valuable. We weren't really getting that much value from it, so we moved past those.
Okay.
And so we were measuring employee satisfaction before. I'm not saying that we don't value that anymore. We definitely had some defect metrics. We had some other measurements on integration frequency. So, we're in a scaled environment. We want to know kind of the state of our increment more often than not. And so, we kind of go into integrated increment frequency. So how often do we believe we're in a state where all of the teams believe we're, potentially releasable, that if we, released right now, it would be valuable. And so, again, like I said, some of these things we realize really aren't that valuable anymore, and we just stopped doing. Some of them then we actually included and move forward with, to analyze and ultimately add to our single view, our dashboard. So what were we measuring afterwards then? We looked at customer satisfaction, so we do that through NPS scores. I want to talk a little bit about employee satisfaction. So we have a survey, and it's pretty simple. There's one question that kind of asks, smiley face, frowny face, meh face, and then two very pointed questions. And we're looking to really understand from a free text kind of point of view where people are at. And we would do this every sprint, and really got some good data from that. We have a bunch of metrics around releases, around defects, but I can kind of show some of those as we go. And I did want to kind of point out one of these, the image that's here. This is an actual screenshot from our dashboard. Most of our data is visualized in this way, so data trending over time, year over year kind of thing. So this is just a snapshot, a preview of what our dashboard looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to kind of go into next steps, so all right, we have all this data, we made it transparent, we visualized everything. What do you want to do with it now? So I guess kind of the first step is like we gather this data from a lot of existing tools and processes. Unfortunately, some of it is still manual, and we're looking to change that. But stakeholders meet every 2 weeks and talk about it. We look at the data. We look at different trends. We look at, hey, do people understand this? Are people finding this visual, valuable? Is there a way that we can make it so it's more easily digestible or easy to comprehend? We also discuss things like, okay, we didn't add this KVM before, this key value measure, because it wasn't applicable. Is it applicable now? Is there other ones that we want to add to really to beef this up kind of thing? And then outside of the stakeholders, the Scrum teams, they discuss this at places like Sprint Review and at retrospective, and really then ultimately if you're gathering all this stuff, it's arguably meaningless unless you do something about it.
Nic,
so, yes.
I just wanted to ask you, so obviously you bring up the stakeholders, and this is a question that comes up about a lot of frameworks that generally companies are using or trying, is how did you get the stakeholders involved? How did you, was it something that you had to say, hey guys, this is data that we've been collecting and we want to show you? Or was it, hey management, this is a framework that we'd like to try and engage in?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. I think I created a conversation around really where we kicked off was, how do we know that we're progressing? I believe that this framework can help us show that, and so let's try it. And I think generally we have an atmosphere of a bias towards action kind of thing. Let's try it and see what happens. Worst case is, we get it wrong and maybe we don't do it again, or maybe we change it. So yeah, it was let's just jump in and see what happens and see how it goes.
That's super interesting.
It was really great.
Yeah, because it's nice to hear that support. Obviously, I've been around talking about EBM for a while, or even Nexus. And a lot of the times when people are introduced to new ideas, there's that resistance, and the first thing they want to reach to is, how is this other company that's like my company done it? And
right.
I was really wondering, and I was going to ask it at the end, but why didn't that happen? It was something that I was thinking about when we were preparing with this is it never happened at NetHealth. You guys didn't say, show me a case study or show me somebody else that's done that. And so it's nice to hear that you said, you know what, it's not like we have something else, let's just try it. And then you
Right.
had that support internally. There's a question coming from the crowd is, you talked about employee satisfaction and you said happy, smiley face, smiley face, frowny face, math face, and then 2 pointed questions. How are you actually measuring that employee satisfaction?
Sure. So we'll essentially take the the data, the number of smiley faces, frowny faces, math faces, and show that over time using just percentages. And then we also all of these surveys are anonymous. So we take the responses from the 2 pointed questions and we make the results of every survey public to the company, that is. So at any one moment, you can go and read what people were feeling during that period of time. So while it's not necessarily, that free text isn't necessarily discrete data, right? It still kind of gives you a feeling of, hey, this is what it was like during that time. This is what people were thinking. And then we use, like I said, the smiley face data as discrete.
Awesome. Okay. So you were talking about experimenting and taking this data and doing some with it.
Yeah, so let's go into a little bit, about how we did that. I think one of the things that we started to realize when we really dug in was we have an opportunity to go after the current value, key value area. And so we'll jump right in and say we wanted to look at improving employee satisfaction. And like I was talking about, we have a survey each sprint. And what we were hearing was that Scrum teams really needed more time to focus. They thought that there were, 1, too many meetings, 2, kind of weird times in between meetings, when you have a meeting for an hour and then maybe a half hour of nothing and then another hour meeting. You're not really, doing a whole lot, or you're not going to be able to get a whole lot done during that half hour. So what we looked at was, let's do a 4-week experiment to increase that focus time by implementing what was dubbed no meeting Mondays. It has a great ring to it. But so what we did for that month, it was highly suggested that essentially no one schedule meetings during that time.
Wait, whose idea was it?
It was the Scrum team's idea.
Oh, great.
And I guess, we asked, so it wasn't just the Scrum teams, right? Scrum teams interact with all kinds of different people across the organization. So I would say the ask was really anyone that kind of is involved with the Scrum teams, try this out with us.
And your Scrum team is a Nexus that's like 6 teams or something, right?
Oh yeah, yes. Mm-hmm. So what we found was that it was great. People loved it. We saw an increase in employee satisfaction from the survey. We saw that the time spent context switching went down, and then because it was so great that we really looked to then add more days and more times for focus. And we've been kind of going on the really ramped up version for about a month or 2, and we're now going to start measuring it again and see what does it look like. Is there something else we should be doing? Do we extend ourselves too much? Kind of thing. Let's look at it and then rinse and repeat.
Excellent.
So the next one is still around employee satisfaction. And so what we were hearing additionally was that teams wanted more ownership. They wanted to own what it is that they were working on. They wanted, because of that, then they would believe that they had, or they believed that they had more time to innovate on what it is that they were building. And again, less context switching. So this sprint you might be working on this thing, but then next sprint you might be working on something else. And then, there's really no reason to really buy into it because it's always going to be something different. So we started talking about that and we said, okay, how can we move forward on this? And we looked at, is there a way that we can just organize ourselves around the work to allow teams to have that ownership? And we looked at, can we organize around features? Could we organize around products? Could we organize around maybe user personas? And ultimately where we landed was organized around architectural areas of ownership. And I think during this time, we also had an initiative going where we wanted to, disassemble or decouple our monolith of our application. And so what this allowed us to do was really align our strategy, right, our technical architectural strategy with these different areas, with people's skills, and really then what people wanted to do. And we created ultimately 7 Scrum teams from, I think it was 6 at the time. I can't remember.
For those of you who may be interested actually in a self-selection team workshop, Nic and his former colleague Valerie, and they did a Scrum Pulse on this too. So it's something that you can log on to listen to about self-selection team formation and what that looked like.
Great, thank you. And what, again, we realized is we did create some ownership, and while we just scratched the surface and we have a long way to go, it's really starting to make a difference. And again, making that transparent through employee satisfaction. We have begun to remove those dependencies that I talked about before. And what it's done is really it's easier for teams and really anybody else in the organization to kind of understand who should work on what and why and when. And it makes a lot of conversations potentially not needed, but then when we are kind of talking about it, it makes them really, really meaningful because everybody has that, again, shared understanding of who should do what and why.
Okay.
And then we looked at, again, still talking about the current value, key value area. We looked at employee satisfaction, or sorry, customer satisfaction. And I remember a time when management and stakeholders, they raised an issue to us regarding customer satisfaction and the correlation there with defect trends. And everybody, I think, knew that this was an issue, but we didn't really have any data to show for it. So we started there, and we just started collecting the number of defects or the types of defects, things like that were escalated specifically by clients. And it really allowed us to have a conversation about technical debt, but it had allowed us to have a conversation. I was like, hey, this is something we know is fact. It's not, maybe I heard this or I heard this. This is the real data to show for it. And what we decided to do was then create a service level agreement for defect resolution after creation. And what that did was, if you're a customer and you're saying, hey, this thing's broken, what we've now done is now we're going to respond more quickly because we believe that you'll be satisfied if we do that. I think the other thing that it does is it lowers our technical debt in our application by, instead of, again, just adding the defect onto the list, that we may never get to or may never get to soon. We're resolving it when we find it, kind of thing. And go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a few pretty powerful things in there. So you started off when you're talking about why we're going to measure value is creating transparency. And here's case in point, now you guys are monitoring these things. You made a decision to focus on customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction as these small experiments. And it's allowing you to, kind of pulse those things, which are easy to pulse generally, and then run some experiments and then, see the uptick or the downtick, but also that it relates to different areas. So for instance, you're working on customer satisfaction and the other one was employee satisfaction, but these have both, to me, affected your ability to innovate, right? So you're lowering your tech debt and that allows you to be more productive in other things. So there's a few powerful things, and especially why when we talk about EBM, we're looking holistically at how things are affecting each other.
Yeah, very good point. It's really interesting when you get into it, kind of where all the fingers go and what everything touches, and
and to have a fact-based conversation rather than management said this and we have to do this now. It's kind of allowing you to have a platform to talk.
Definitely.
There's a question of just back a couple of points on employee satisfaction. How often would you conduct the surveys?
Great question. We we used to conduct it, so we have 2 week sprints and we would do it at the end of the sprint every 2 weeks. But we've kind of realized that there could be a bit of survey fatigue in that. So we're going to change the frequency to still at the end of a sprint, but every other sprint, so once a month kind of thing. And we'll see how that goes, and if it is improved, then maybe we got it right, maybe not. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Just back to the when we're talking about the employee satisfaction, how you guys are organized around architecture. There's a comment here. It sounds like those teams want to self-organize into component teams, which allowed them to decrease the number of cross-team dependencies. And the Scrum teams were happy with that change. Is that what happened? Can you talk a little bit more about the structure of those teams?
Sure. Yeah, so we have different kind of pieces of our application, and like I said, we're trying to really decouple a lot of those pieces to be more independent. We're talking about autonomy, all of those great things, and so we might have a team that is focused specifically around interfacing, maybe with third-party vendors or other people like that. We might have a team that's specifically focused on clinical documentation. We might have another team that's focused on scheduling and those kinds of things. So literally,
this is on your platform, your application.
Right. Yeah, this is on our XFit platform. So yeah, we kind of broke it down into those little components that could be scalable and really more easily to work with.
Okay, that's what works for you guys. There's a really excellent question coming in. Was there, so we talked a lot about transparency. Did you see any discomfort? Was there any pushback coming back around this transparency?
I don't know that there was necessarily any pushback. I think that it was, I don't know if, I think a surprise is probably the best word to use there. I think surprise that, oh wow, that's actually what the data is, but also surprise as, oh, that's something that we can look at, and that's something that's important. So I don't know that there was anybody that was pushing back. I think that people were very, very curious and somewhat surprised.
Yeah, I think surprise and discomfort is an excellent words. It's like when you weigh yourself, you're like, oh, surprise.
That's right.
And then you have to make a decision. Yeah. So a lot of the times when things become apparent, and it's a surprise to, let's say, teams, that you can expect something to happen. People getting much more motivated because they're committed to what's going on. People getting unmotivated, turnover, those kind of things. Thank you.
And I guess I also would want to say that uncomfortable is a weird word. I mean, I think that being uncomfortable is a good thing most of the time, in that it gets you out of your comfort zone, so you're trying new things, and ultimately you'll grow. Maybe that's personally or professionally, but hopefully the organization does too.
Thanks.
So I think the last one this is the second to last one that we'll touch on is we looked at our ability to innovate. So what really is a way that we can tell if people are using our features that we're building, using our products? We didn't really have it. We always wanted to. We had some ways, but they weren't great. Lots of manual work. So we begun to look at different tools that could kind of help us out. And where we landed was an application called Pendo. And if you haven't heard of them, definitely go look them up. But what this allowed us to do was make investment decisions. So, hey, nobody's using this feature anymore. Should we continue to work on it? Because no one's using it. Maybe it doesn't make sense. I'm not sure. It allowed us to also provide education for our users. So maybe we would just release something new and we could say, hey, this is how it works. This is why you'd want to use it. And it's all in the application, very little manual work there. same thing with kind of recommendation. So and education. So, hey, we noticed that you use this thing, this feature. We also have this other thing that if you use it, man, it'll make your job a lot easier, kind of thing. We look at implementing, or sorry, in-product help, which we believe reduce support costs. We are now able to recreate and fix defects more quickly. And then we're looking at friction points. So let's say you're in the application and you're going through your workflow, whatever it is, but then 90% of people always go to the help after that, go to help documentation after that. We clearly see that there's something going on there that we need to look at. And so all of this to say, we now know empirically how people are using our application, and we don't have to guess. And it's not always, while we'd love to talk to every single customer all the time, that's not always possible. So this gives us another tool to use to from data know how people are using our features, and we can make decisions because of that.
Great.
So the last one is we kind of looked at unrealized value, and we wanted to focus on outcomes. I think we've always, you can see that from what we defined as valuable is outcomes. And with that focus, we wanted to share those business outcomes that we're hoping to create with the Scrum teams, because if they can really understand the customer, they can understand the why, then they're going to do an amazing job when they do the how, when they take that and run with it. And so from Lean UX, I forget his name, Patricia, what is his name?
Jeff Gothelf.
Yes. He puts forward something called hypothesis-driven development. And he puts this format forward that says, as a user or as someone, I'd like to do something. We believe that by building this feature for this person, we will achieve some outcome. And we know that we're successful when we get some signal from the market. And you describe, what that signal is. And what this allowed us to do was, like I said, really make sure that the teams really knew why it is we wanted to do what we wanted to do. But it created a shorter feedback loop, made a lot of those conversations easier with stakeholders, with customers, with really anybody involved. And I think ultimately what we saw was that we were increasing our customer satisfaction, because we can have a conversation about the outcome, what it is that we're building right now. They could tell us whether or not we got it or not. And hey, you know what? We're going to be getting that to you next month or something like that. And just having that shared dialogue, that shared understanding about what it is that we're doing really makes people happy that we're doing the right things for them. So yeah, we saw an increase in NPS from that.
So these are 4 or 5 experiments, things that you looked at, and you started at looking at just employee satisfaction. That was one of the key value statements that you made at the beginning. And then you talked specifically about understanding the customer. So you said value for us is that our customers, physicians, let's say, can do their jobs easier. So ease of use when using our software. Now, how is this tied back? Because we talked a lot about the health of the things, and there's some questions coming in here. First of all, can you explain quickly what NPS is, just really, really quick, and then talk to us about that correlation. Do you guys look at revenue? Are you looking at some other things that matter, maybe to the executive teams, and showing them all this information?
Sure. So NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, and we do a survey with our actual end users and ask them, essentially, would you be willing to kind of recommend NetHealth and promote us? So Net Promoter Score. So there's promoters, there's detractors, there's a scale from negative 100 to positive 100, and if you do a quick search on the internet, you'll be able to find that relatively easily. As for the correlation, it's really interesting that you ask. I think ultimately, right, if you're not making those correlations, you have an opportunity there. And so we have been really focused on making it so we have the full picture. We have all of the metrics that would allow us to make those correlations. So we haven't necessarily done full picture correlation. We've done little pieces, but as you know, one piece could very much influence another, and we're not there yet. But it's something we're very excited about doing.
Yeah, and that was one of the conversations we had. And I talked about another customer who had this dashboard, and then they started to bring in, revenue and sales numbers forecasted versus actual, and then have a very clear conversation between the teams and management about, some things that were happening. So it was back to that transparency thing. You showed us a bunch of experiments. And a lot of these are positive, right? So positive outcomes. We tried these things. Did you guys have anything that, let's say, created some negative value? Were there some negative outcomes, and what'd you do with that?
Sure. So I think one of the things when I think back is we tried to improve our time to market. So, one of the best ways that not the best ways, one of the ways that you can do that is to release more frequently, right? Get the things into the customer's hands more frequently. So we tried to increase our release frequency, and I think that we tried it, and we just weren't there yet. We weren't ready. So it didn't provide the positive result that we were necessarily looking for, but we definitely learned from that and used it going forward. So while it appeared negative, it was also a positive. I think another way that I could kind of share something along those lines is around the employee satisfaction survey that somebody asked about. How often do we do it? I think that we did it every sprint, we did it every 2 weeks, and what we realized was that there was probably some survey fatigue, and so maybe the results of that weren't as great because of it. So we changed it to every month, every other sprint.
Nice. So coming to the end, what'd you learn?
We learned that we're improving. While we don't have this whole big correlation that we'd like, we are improving, and that evidence is one of the best ways to engage in conversations because, like I said, shared understanding about any topic can really go a long way. We have learned that we've switched or begun switching from a process-driven mindset to really a value-driven mindset. I mean, you'll hear people all over the company now say things like, well, how is that valuable? Or what is the value of that? Instead of things like, well, that's what we always used to do kind of thing. And I guess, the other thing that we've learned is as we grow and change, get into new markets, whatever it is, that this data will guide us, right? Will help us. Hey, look, we just made this change. Look, now we have this data. It's trending negatively. Is there a correlation there? Is there something we can do to dig in and understand that and get us back to where we need to be going? And
that'll be interesting. And that's interesting about the transparency and the accountability behind it, right? So you've been creating transparency. This is, kind of becoming part of the culture at NetHealth. And, what are you doing to improve that? And are you holding yourselves accountable to that? So as you make decisions at any company, keeping an eye on that, you have some guiding indicators of what you can do.
Very well said.
Thank you. All right.
So what are our next steps? Well, like I said before, there's some automation that we need to implement to make a lot of the manual efforts go away, decrease them, if anything else. The interesting thing about manually collecting data, though, is that when you are the person that mines it or that has your hands in it, you learn a lot about what it is that creates the data, or really you're looking at it in a different way than somebody who just kind of looks at a screen of a chart or whatever it is. And so I don't know. I guess I just wanted to highlight that a little bit, is that there are arguably some pros to manually collecting data, although ultimately it's not where I think we should be. The next thing that we want to do is, continue to review this every 2 weeks and make sure we're working towards, capturing all of the KVMs that we believe will paint the most complete picture of our organization. And then, can we define the targets that we think we should be at? Can we socialize those areas that need improvement? Hey, we're nowhere near our target on this one. Let's start socializing that and continue to experiment and do what we can today, make the smallest decision, and learn from it, and rinse and repeat.
So simple, but not easy stuff, huh?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I think that's it. I'd like to just take some questions from the audience now.
Sure.
This one's really interesting. How did the development team respond to the transparency of shared business outcomes? I made that experience, and the developers and admins responded, "Leave me alone with your business stuff. I just want to work on my code." Did you have any of that? Well, and if not, or if yes, what would your suggestion be to this person?
I don't know that it was necessarily like that. I'm sure, there may have been a person or two, but I think it was, we were at a time where we needed to talk, or, speak about what we wanted to do like that. Because it helped us a lot of the times, to be honest with you, stay out of the weeds in some conversations. And so people were really happy to understand the why and be able to then take it and run with it. And I guess what I would say is, I would ask those, development team members, how it is that they would best like to understand why it is that we're doing what we're doing, because I don't know that unless you do understand the why, that you're going to be able to do the best what or the best how possible.
That's really well said. Great suggestion. Another thing that we think about is, a lot of what we do when we're talking about this agile stuff is trying to make a bridge. And when you don't understand the business goal, it's keeping that wall there. And we want to remove walls. Anyway, so here's a question that's going back to employee satisfaction. Do you have, would you be willing to share some of the typical questions you might ask in an employee satisfaction survey? I know
Sure.
you mentioned the smiley face and happy face and stuff like that.
Sure. So we have asked, and we do ask a question today that essentially says something like, can you kind of speak to something that you see that's happening today that you think, should continue to happen or we should do more of? So maybe, they see a little, conversation happening or I don't know, some initiative happening. This is their ability to say, hey, I see this. This is awesome. Let's keep going, kind of thing. Another question would be something along the lines of, is there something that the organization could give you today? Maybe it's tangible, maybe it's not, that would just make your job easier. And that's really, really interesting, because I think, what some people could assume is that this survey might replace a retrospective, but I don't know. Well, I know that it doesn't. I think it's a very complementary piece of it. It allows people to kind of share anonymously what it is that they're feeling, but then you can see what everybody else is saying, right? So you can just start a conversation, knowing that you're not the only one that feels this way, or again, shares those feelings.
Thank you. One of the things that we talked about in unrealized value was how you guys were stating your epics in the format of the hypothesis-driven delivery development. How do you guys do that? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Are you doing it ahead of development? The question is, are you doing it ahead of development? But can you just talk a little bit more about what that looks like, and how your product owners are stating that, and just kind of what that cycle is?
Sure. So most of the time, an idea comes in from somewhere, and we want to, if possible, as before it gets to the larger group, the larger nexus, or when it gets to the larger nexus, we're delivering it in this format. And one, because everybody knows the format, but two, because it again kind of makes the conversation very, very specific, but also very broad. So kind of open for the interpretation that's more often than not required. So maybe it comes to a Nexus refinement event where we have all of the different Scrum teams or representatives, appropriate representatives, and we deliver it and we say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is the problem. And maybe a team will take it and maybe they change it completely to something that makes more sense to them or whatever it is. Or maybe we break it up into more pieces and maybe now we have two epics because of this problem. The thing that's really great, again, outside of the teams really understanding it, is when we go to sprint review, it kind of just makes it very, very easy for stakeholders who might not know what it is that we're talking about, describe what it is that we're talking about in a value-driven way that is easy for them to understand and very beneficial. And I think just that format itself has really done a lot of great things for sharing information.
And I like that you guys, what we talked about is that not only are you closing that loop, right? So a lot of times, we'll get to done, right? But are we closing that loop when we talk about unrealized value to see if it was actually helpful for us? So did it increase revenue? Did it increase, our NPS score? So you put something in there that's measurable in business terms, sometimes, mostly for you guys. And I think that's been something that's really interesting. That a lot of teams are trying to move toward.
What other questions are coming in?
They want to know about you want to talk about a little bit more about architecture?
No, that's too dangerous.
Okay. So what are your recommendations for organizations that may want to embrace using evidence-based management, and they're thinking about trying to look at these different key value areas, but they're goaled, and I'm interpreting this question, but they're goaled differently, right? So maybe they're working on different products. They're responsible for different sorts of revenue. Or they're just thinking about different things. So if you're an agile coach and you're looking at this organization that says, hey, we want to use EBM, we want to embrace these KVAs, but we're all motivated by different things, where would you start with that? And maybe I can chime in after.
Sure. So that's really interesting. I can relate to that. I think ultimately what I would recommend is a very similar approach that I took, in that while most let's call them teams or departments, whatever it is that you want to call it, do have different things that they care about, things that they are responsible for, things that are valuable. Ultimately, they should roll up to a greater purpose. And if they don't, then maybe that's a conversation that you can start. But I would start with, again, defining really what it is that your organization at large finds to be valuable, and then what is it that you're doing, or that your team, group, or whatever is doing to contribute to that. From there, you'll do a lot, and just showing that you're looking to understand this is going to be really important. But then, can you just start small? Can you see what can I do today to keep this going forward, or to start it and go from there? I always recommend start small and try to learn as fast as possible.
Excellent. And I would add that there's a lot of ways that you can try to slice the problem. Think about it, what's most meaningful for you. So if you have different key revenue areas, does that mean you have different products? Slice it that way. Or, just slice it quite small and roll everything up in terms of what you're looking at. But the other thing is, you could also ask yourself, what are a couple problems that you're facing? And, what experiments would you try to address those problems? So in order to do that, you have to know where you are now, and just say, okay, where am I on now? What are you measuring? And then run an experiment and try to hit that. and close that loop, and then look at how it affects value for everyone. So I'm going to wrap this up. There's a lot of questions let's see. Well, this wasn't, you know what we'll do is someone's asking for the slide with the overview of NetHealth's key value measures again. We will actually be posting this online, so you'll be able to hear this recording and also see the different slides. And there you can see, again, Nic was kind enough to share a couple of screenshots from his dashboard, and we'll be doing some more with other companies that will show some of the examples of what they're doing. But in that, I'd like to thank you, Nic, for taking the time to share this experience what NetHealth is doing, exposing kind of your learnings and sharing that with everyone.
Of course, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Nic is someone who is really, for me, a true servant leader. So I want to show these things for you just to make sure that you can always be encouraging yourself to learn more. We do have different learning paths that are available to you on our website. So Scrum.org has 3 new learning paths. Nic, I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's on our website where you can look for the Scrum Master, Product Owner, and even Leadership. So this might be one of the things that you could listen to around one of those areas. So that's available for everyone. Please continue to connect with us. Scrum.org, so the community, we have forums, we have Scrum Pulses, which are these webinars where you can interact with us over the platform, and also Twitter, LinkedIn, all these other things. Some of these questions that you guys have, if you listen to this or if you have questions we haven't answered today, please feel free to contact Nic or me. So you can find us on Twitter or on our emails. That will be posted. So thank you for everyone very much for taking an hour out of your day. Thank you, Nic, and I really appreciate having everyone here. Scrum on.